I learned something about people the day I started wearing the same jacket twice in a week. It wasn't even a bad jacket. It was navy, clean, fitted well enough, but it wasn't new. And in my circle, new mattered: new shoes, new phones, new investments, new opportunities. Repetition signaled stagnation. Familiarity hinted at failure. So when I wore that jacket to dinner with friends on Tuesday and then again to my cousin's birthday on Saturday, I saw it happen, the subtle flicker in their eyes. Not pity exactly, something softer and sharper at the same time. Assessment. I made it easy for them. I moved into a smaller apartment last year. 1 bedroom, 3rd floor, no elevator. I told everyone I wanted to simplify. I mentioned rent prices rising, interest rates tightening, how it felt smarter to downsize. I let my words hover in that careful space between explanation and excuse. They filled in the rest. I stopped upgrading my phone. I brought homemade dishes instead of catered trays. I suggested brunch instead of dinner. When group vacations were discussed, I mentioned work being tight. When someone proposed splitting an expensive gift, I offered a smaller amount and smiled apologetically. Outwardly, my life looked like contraction. Inwardly, it was anything but. My mornings were quiet rituals. I made coffee at home, sat by the narrow window that overlooked the parking lot, and reviewed my accounts. Not because I needed to stretch dollars, but because I enjoyed watching discipline compound. Investments, savings, diversified funds, conservative growth, liquid reserves. Security doesn't announce itself, it hums. And I listened to that hum every morning. The difference between being broke and appearing broke is this: one is fear, the other is control. Fear keeps you awake at night. Control lets you sleep deeply while others misunderstand you. I slept deeply. That hadn't always been true. There was a time when I believed money was meant to flow freely through loyalty, when generosity felt like proof of love, when I thought being needed was the same as being valued. Back then, I didn't track who repaid what. I didn't hesitate before swiping my card. If someone struggled, I covered it. If someone had a dream, I funded it. If someone fell short, I bridged the gap. I mistook access for affection. The memory still arrives uninvited sometimes. The conference room, the coffee gone cold, the papers slid across the table with my signature already highlighted. I had co-signed a loan for someone I trusted more than myself. "It's just a formality," they'd said. "You know I'd never let anything happen to you." I knew a lot of things back then. Until I didn't. When the payments stopped, so did the phone calls. When the business collapsed, so did the explanations. I learned what silence costs. I learned what denial looks like when it's dressed as optimism. And I learned that banks do not care about loyalty, they care about signatures. Mine was on the line. I absorbed the damage quietly. I sold assets. I rearranged plans. I rebuilt what had been siphoned off by someone else's ambition and someone else's excuses. I never publicly named them. I never exposed the details. Not because they deserved protection, but because I deserved peace. Reputation is fragile. I chose to preserve mine, even when theirs cracked. What surprised me wasn't the financial setback. It was the social recalibration. People who once praised my generosity began to question my judgment. "You should have been more careful," they said, as if hindsight were wisdom and not convenience. The narrative shifted subtly. I was no longer the dependable one. I was the naive one. That shift did something inside me. It didn't make me bitter. It made me observant. So when I rebuilt, carefully, strategically, I did it without announcement. I stopped hosting expensive dinners. I stopped offering to cover shortfalls. I stopped stepping forward first. And then I did something deliberate. I let them believe I hadn't recovered. At first, it was accidental. I declined a weekend trip because I genuinely didn't want to go. Someone joked, "Saving up, huh?" I shrugged and said, "Something like that." The joke stuck. So did the assumption. It became an experiment. At gatherings, conversations shifted slightly away from me. Investment talk grew more guarded in my presence, as if market strategies were confidential intelligence I couldn't afford to hear. When someone mentioned a new car or property, they did it with a glance in my direction that suggested comparison. "Times are tough," one friend said once, patting my shoulder after I suggested we split a bill evenly instead of covering the whole thing like I used to. "You'll bounce back." Bounce back. I nodded. I let it sit between us like a quiet misunderstanding. The truth was simple. I had bounced back. I had rebuilt more carefully than before. I had diversified beyond dependence on any one person's promise. My accounts were steady. My emergency fund could carry me for years. My investments had matured. But something in me wanted to know, if I stopped being useful, who would remain kind? Kindness without benefit is rare currency. The first real shift happened at my cousin Daniel's engagement party. It was at a rented venue with tall glass windows and an open bar. I wore the navy jacket again. It fit the occasion just fine, but I knew it wasn't impressive. I arrived with a modest gift. Not cheap, thoughtful, personal, but not extravagant. As I stood near the bar, I overheard two distant relatives speaking softly, not softly enough. "He's still in that apartment, right?" "Yeah, after what happened with that loan thing. Shame, he was doing so well." I sipped my drink and didn't turn around. Sympathy is heavier than judgment. Judgment at least respects your agency. Sympathy assumes fragility. Later that night, Daniel clasped my shoulder. "Hey man, if you ever need connections, let me know. My future father-in-law's got some openings. Might help you get back on track." Back on track. I smiled. I appreciate that. He meant well, most of them did. That was the unsettling part. Their condescension wasn't cruel, it was casual, effortless, unexamined. That's when I committed fully to the performance. I downgraded my car, not to something unreliable, just something understated. I avoided brand names. I mentioned budgeting apps in conversation. I spoke about being careful these days with a tone of reflective maturity. And they believed it. The fascinating thing about people is how quickly they recalibrate their expectations. When I paid for dinner in the past, it was generosity. When I stopped, it was decline. The action changed, but the interpretation depended entirely on the story they preferred. Soon, invitations changed too. I wasn't excluded outright. That would have been obvious. Instead, I received last-minute texts. "We assumed you'd be busy. It's kind of pricey, so we didn't want you to feel pressure. It's just a small thing." Small things reveal large truths. At a friend's birthday dinner, I suggested a less expensive wine. A simple, practical suggestion. The table went quiet for half a second too long. Then someone laughed lightly. "Let's not stress about it," another said, glancing at me. "It's on me." The subtext was clear. "Relax, we know you can't." I let them pay. The old version of me would have insisted, would have overcompensated. The new version leaned back and observed, who seemed irritated by my restraint and who remained unaffected. Arrogance is loud, patience is silent. And I had time. The most revealing moments weren't the big ones. They were the small recalibrations. The way conversations about future investments happened without me. The way someone would say, "You probably don't want to hear about this. It's boring financial stuff." As if I hadn't once been the one explaining compound interest at dinner. One afternoon, I met my sister, Maya, for coffee. We used to rotate paying. That day, when the bill came, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching for it quickly. "I've got it," she said. "You've covered so much for everyone over the years." It sounded generous. It was. It sounded like repayment. It felt like demotion. "I can split it," I said evenly. No," she insisted, already handing over her card. I let her. On the walk outside, she slipped her arm through mine. "You know we're all proud of you, right? For adjusting." Adjusting. As if my life were damage control. I nodded. Yeah, adjusting. What none of them knew was that every time they made those assumptions, I made notes, not on paper, but in perception. Who offered help without diminishing me? Who distanced themselves quietly? who maintained the same tone regardless of what they believed about my finances. It became clear that generosity had once been my social glue. Without it, certain bonds loosened. The experiment deepened. When a group trip was planned to a coastal resort, I said I couldn't justify the expense. There were murmurs of understanding. Photos later surfaced online, smiling faces, clinking glasses, captions about success and gratitude. No one asked if I wanted to come anyway. That was the point. I wasn't testing their willingness to fund me. I was observing their willingness to include me. Inclusion, I learned, often comes with invisible thresholds. The most ironic part, I felt freer than ever. There's clarity in not being needed for your wallet. There's relief in not being the automatic solution. But clarity has a cost. At another gathering, someone joked openly this time. Careful, don't suggest the cheap option around him. He'll actually do it. Laughter. I smiled along. The comment floated harmlessly on the surface, but underneath it lay a quiet repositioning. I had moved from admired to accommodated. And I let it happen. Because I wasn't waiting for their respect. I was waiting for something else. The first crack appeared not in their perception of me, but in their stability. It started subtly, a canceled dinner, a stressed tone in a phone call, a passing comment about market fluctuations hitting harder than expected. Then Daniel called one evening, his voice lacking its usual buoyancy. "Hey," he said, "you free this weekend? There's something important we should talk about, family stuff." Family stuff. The words lingered longer than they should have. I leaned back in my small, underestimated apartment, surrounded by quiet evidence of security they couldn't see. "Sure," I said calmly. "What's going on?" He hesitated. "It's just, well, we might need to have a conversation, all of us, about some things." All of us. The tone had shifted, not from arrogance to humility, not yet, but from certainty to uncertainty. From superiority to something closer to concern. I stared at the navy jacket hanging by the door, still perfectly intact. The performance had run long enough to teach me, who mistook modesty for failure. Now, it seemed, they were about to test what they believed about resilience. And I had a feeling the conversation they wanted to have wasn't about my finances at all. It was about theirs. Judgment has a temperature. It's cool, detached, almost bored. But calculation is different. It's warmer, focused, intentional. In the weeks after Daniel's call, I felt the shift before anyone said a word. Conversations that once skimmed past me now lingered. Questions carried weight. The same people who once edited themselves around my limitations suddenly seemed interested in how I was managing mine. Distance softened into curiosity. Curiosity sharpened into strategy. I had spent a year letting them believe I had less. Now I watched them realize they might need more. Patience, I had learned, is only powerful when you are prepared to hold it until the moment it matters. That moment had arrived. Section 2, the ask and the unmasking 5,000 words. Daniel's house had always been louder than necessary. Even when nothing was happening, there was a hum, music playing softly, television murmuring in the background, voices overlapping. But the night he called the family meeting, the house felt padded, muted, like someone had turned the volume of confidence down to almost nothing. I noticed it the moment I stepped inside. No music, no television, just quiet conversation breaking apart when I entered. That was new. Daniel approached first, handshake firm but palms slightly damp. His smile tried to reach his eyes and failed halfway. "Thanks for coming," he said. "We just thought it'd be good to talk as a family." Good to talk. The phrase felt rehearsed. Maya stood near the kitchen island, arms crossed in a way that suggested she was bracing for impact. Two uncles sat at the table, unusually serious. Even Aunt Layla, who normally led every gathering with loud opinions and louder laughter, was subdued. Confidence had been their uniform. Tonight, it didn't fit. We sat. No one rushed to fill the silence. That, more than anything, confirmed it. Daniel cleared his throat. So, you all know about the investment group I joined last year. I did. Everyone did. He'd spoken about it often: private access, insider networks, accelerated returns. The kind of opportunity reserved for people who moved fast and thought bigger than the average investor. He had looked at me once, months ago, when explaining it, not unkindly, just pointedly, as if to say this isn't really your lane anymore. Now his voice carried a tremor. There were complications. Complications. He avoided the word loss. The market shifted unexpectedly, one uncle offered, stepping in. Timing issue. Regulatory delays, Daniel added quickly. Funds are frozen temporarily. Temporarily. I folded my hands in my lap and listened. It unraveled slowly, not all at once. They had pooled capital, family and close friends, significant capital. The projected returns had encouraged reinvestment before the first cycle closed. Lines of credit had been leveraged, assets repositioned. Then an audit. Then an investigation. Then a freeze. Not fraud, they insisted, just scrutiny, just red tape, just an unfortunate alignment of timing and oversight. But liquidity had evaporated. Payments were due, deadlines loomed. Personal guarantees, those quiet signatures everyone forgets until banks remember, were surfacing. I watched Daniel as he spoke. The same man who once explained venture strategy with effortless certainty now measured each sentence like it might collapse under its own weight. Former arrogance versus present vulnerability. It wasn't theatrical, it was real. And how exposed are you? I asked calmly. The question shifted the room. Daniel blinked, surprised by the directness. More than we anticipated, he admitted. Maya stepped in. It's temporary. We just need to bridge the gap until things unfreeze. Bridge the gap. There it was, language I recognized intimately. How long? I asked. Hard to say, Daniel replied. A few months, maybe 6. 6 months can feel like a blink or a lifetime, depending on what's due. I nodded slowly, and the exposure. Silence again. One uncle finally answered. 7 figures. The numbers settled heavily on the table between us. 7 figures of confidence, now reduced to uncertainty. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I had been the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you overextend for someone else's ambition. Now the room held several cautionary tales at once. They weren't asking yet, not directly. This was stage 1, context, emotional priming, shared concern. I let it continue. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We've been exploring options, asset liquidation, short-term private loans, but the rates being offered right now are predatory. Predatory. The word brushed against my memory. I had once been warned about predatory rates. I had once been assured I'd never need to worry about them. And your personal exposure? I asked again. He hesitated. If things don't release within 90 days, I could lose the house. The house he'd bought 2 years ago with celebratory champagne and speeches about upward momentum. Former superiority versus present fragility. Maya looked at me carefully, not pleading, not yet, but assessing. How are you managing these days? She asked lightly, as if it were a casual pivot. There it was. Not the ask, the probe. I manage, I said evenly. Daniel nodded. We've always admired that about you, your discipline. Admired. The word felt recent, newly rediscovered. We just didn't realize how disciplined you were, one uncle added. Living modestly like you do. Living modestly. The subtext hung unspoken. You must have something saved. You must have protected yourself better than we thought. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. The conversation drifted for another half hour. Legal counsel, restructuring attempts, possible refinancing. Each detail built the emotional architecture for what was coming. Finally, Daniel exhaled sharply and leaned forward. Look, he said, I'm just going to say it plainly. The room tightened. We might need help. There it was. Not a demand, not yet, just the open door of possibility. Short term, he continued quickly. Bridge capitals, structured, documented, we'd never put you at risk. Never put you at risk. The sentence echoed with unintended cruelty. I met his eyes. You're asking me. A flicker of embarrassment crossed his face. We're asking family. Family helps family. The phrase hovered, waiting to be spoken. Maya stepped closer to the table. After everything we've all been through, it feels right to lean on each other. After everything. I thought of past dinners I'd covered without keeping score, of emergency transfers made quietly, of advice given freely when they once valued my financial insight. I also thought of the subtle jokes, the demotions, the gentle exclusions. Remembered generosity versus forgotten respect. Daniel's voice softened. You've always been steady, even when things were hard for you. Hard for me. The narrative had crystallized. I had struggled. I had survived. Now perhaps I had something set aside. They assumed quiet recovery but modest means. A few 100,000 maybe, enough to matter, not enough to threaten hierarchy. How much are you asking? I said. The number came carefully, calculated to sound reasonable against the backdrop of 7 figures. It was substantial. Substantial enough to test loyalty. They began layering rationale over it. Structured repayment, interest included, equity sweeteners if the investment recovered, legal paperwork to protect me. The more they explained, the clearer the dynamic became. They weren't asking because I was the most capable. They were asking because I was the safest. The one who wouldn't embarrass them publicly. The one who had already absorbed loss quietly before. Entitlement rarely announces itself as entitlement. It dresses as tradition, as solidarity, as emotional debt. You've always stepped up, Maya said softly. We know you believe in us. Believe in us. Belief, the currency that had once cost me dearly. I didn't interrupt. I let them speak until every justification had been exhausted. When silence finally returned, it was heavier than before. I folded my hands on the table. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I have been disciplined. Daniel nodded eagerly. And I have recovered, I continued. The room stilled. I'm not struggling, I said plainly. I haven't been for a long time. Shock is quiet before it's loud. Maya's eyes widened first, then Daniel. One uncle leaned back sharply. I rebuilt everything, I said, and then some. No one spoke. I downsized because I wanted to, I continued. I drive what I drive because I prefer it. I declined trips because I didn't need them. Their expressions shifted. Confusion, recalibration, embarrassment. Assumed weakness versus proven strength. You're doing well, Daniel asked cautiously. Yes. How well? One uncle pressed. I considered the question, not to boast, to clarify. Well enough that what you're asking wouldn't destabilize me, I said evenly. The air changed. Relief flickered across Daniel's face, quick, bright. Then something else followed. Expectation. I didn't tell anyone, I continued, because I wanted to see something. Now curiosity replaced relief. See what? Maya asked. Who treated me differently when they thought I had less? The words landed without aggression, just truth. Color rose in her cheeks. That's not fair, one uncle said defensively. Isn't it? I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply recalled. The jokes, I said. The assumptions, the careful exclusions. Daniel swallowed. We were trying not to make you uncomfortable. I wasn't uncomfortable, I replied. I was informed. Silence again. They were recalculating now, not my assets but their behavior. You let us believe, Maya began. Yes, I said, I did. Why? Daniel asked. Because loyalty without leverage is the only loyalty that matters. I didn't say it that way. I said it simpler. Because I needed to know whether I was valued without my wallet. No one had an immediate answer. The tension shifted. This was no longer just about money. It was about mirror versus reflection. Daniel leaned forward again, urgency returning. Whatever we did or didn't do, that's separate. Right now, we need help. Need sharpens focus. It strips nuance. You need money, I corrected gently. He hesitated. Yes. And you believe family helps family? Yes. I nodded slowly. I agree, I said. Relief again. But family also respects family, I added. That's when the real conversation began. I outlined what I would require, not just paperwork, but transparency, full financial disclosure, legal review by counsel I chose, collateral proportional to risk, no emotional pressure tactics, no expectation of silence if mismanagement surfaced. The room stiffened. That's aggressive, one uncle said. It's accountable, I replied. Transactional loyalty versus principled integrity. If you trust us, Maya said quietly, why all that? Because trust isn't the opposite of structure, I said. It's strengthened by it. Daniel's jaw tightened, pride wrestling with desperation. You think we'd burn you? He asked. I thought that once before, I said calmly. The reminder didn't need names. He looked away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Maya exhaled slowly. He's right, she said. We moved too fast. We believed what we wanted to believe. Her voice trembled, not from manipulation, but recognition. We did treat you differently, she admitted. The admission changed the room more than any financial figure could. Some relationships fracture under pressure. Others reveal sincerity. Daniel looked at her, then at me. The defensiveness softened. If you do this, he said, it won't just be about money. It'll be about making it right. I held his gaze. I'm not offering to make it right, I said. I'm offering a structured opportunity. Clarity, not cruelty. In the end, I agreed to a portion. Not the full ask, enough to bridge without enabling recklessness. Every term documented, every exposure measured. They signed without argument. As I left that night, Daniel walked me to my car, the modest, underestimated car. I misjudged you, he said quietly. You misjudged what mattered, I replied. Driving home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. The experiment had never been about withholding generosity. It had been about revealing its conditions. Wealth, I realized, isn't proven by what you give. It's proven by what you refuse to subsidize. Over the next months, repayments began on schedule. Communication improved. Transparency replaced bravado. Not every relationship recovered fully. One uncle remained distant, embarrassed more than grateful. A cousin who'd once joked about cheap wine avoided eye contact at gatherings. But Maya showed up differently. Conversations returned to substance, not assumption. Daniel asked for advice before making decisions, not after consequences arrived. External wealth versus internal abundance. I hadn't revealed my stability to assert dominance. I revealed it to draw a line. Because being needed feels powerful. But being respected feels permanent. And if there was one thing my quiet year of apparent poverty had taught me, it was this. Money exposes character. But patience reveals it.